I guess you all know me from yesterday. What I really want to talk about here is a little bit of our experiences at the Fort Worth Museum of Science History of trying to use virtual reality in various means and kind of sharing that with the community. By the way, it was fantastic to see all the great VR demos downstairs and upstairs. It was just wonderful to see so much change. And in comparison to the last AstroViz 7 years ago, this was not even a topic out there. Remember, in Seattle, we struggled to put a GeoWall, which is a stereoscopic projection system, up at great difficulty, and now we can have something that's way better in a backpack, and that's kind of the power of VR.
But the GeoWall was pretty cool.
It was pretty cool, but where is it now, right? They split the GeoWall into 2 GeoWalls and made a broader display. But at the museum, we use them in several ways. I just thought it might give you a little background in our experiences. We use it in research and development. One of the things I think is really important, if anybody's wanting to use VR in a public facility, is to get some of the hardware, because the hardware costs are relatively minor compared to your time of facilitating it, or finding a space for it, or developing your own software for it if you're going that route. And for instance, we had a thing where we had an event outside. We didn't know, is it going to work outside? We have to take an Oculus Rift, and we took a Vive outside. Turns out Rift worked in the direct sunlight. Vive didn't for some reason. And so if you don't have the hardware to play with those things, you don't know exactly where it is. And honestly, we've been talking to Oculus Research, and they're interested in informal learning environments because they haven't explored all these different places of where it could go. So I think R&D is a piece of that. We use it for fundraising. We're working on a capital campaign at the museum, and I take some of our funders are elderly, and they're maybe in a nursing home. And so I've taken the VR laptop with the Oculus Rift and shown the model of the new facility in VR, and they could actually, without bringing them a physical model of what they're going to see, and that was powerful. We use it in production. We have, if we produce our dome shows, we look at it in VR because it's so we don't need to get into the dome to look at it, and we can collaboratively work with people in multiple locations. And we're exploring a lot of guest experiences. So we use VR in adult experiences in the evenings. We have people coming through doing, we've used Worldwide Telescope, which has a virtual reality component. We take 360 video. I took a video of the eclipse in 360 video, and then I sped that up, and we can see that in VR, in spherical, and we've used Google Earth. We've looked through a virtual gallery. And we're getting ready to do what we call a virtual reality weekend, an Infinity Festival is kind of the name of it, in Fort Worth, in July 20th through the 22nd, where we're going to have I'm actually talking to several people that have cool VR demos that we're going to show there. We've talked to local vendors. There's a huge number of startups I'm sure all over the country and doing VR. In Fort Worth, there's like 10. And we're not a huge city, so I know that probably wherever you are, there are startups doing that, and connecting with them, giving them a chance to work with public and learning from them, because this is all such a new technology that it's really important to be communicating what works and doesn't work. The big challenges right now are scaling to large numbers of users. Right now, as all these demos had an incredibly staff heavy, if we tried to scale this to 1,000 people, we need 1,000 of us to do that, which is challenging. The technology is changing rapidly, and the costs are coming down in some ways, and the capability is going up on the high end, and how do you do that? There's a huge amount of confusion between VR, AR, or augmented reality and mixed reality, and they're used in different ways, and we need to make sure that we're leveraging that from the guest perspective. And VR content's important. So like I mentioned, we're doing a VR walkthrough of a virtual museum, but we need to have our own content in the museum. How do we get the content? We have to scan it or create it in some way. And also, there are all these different ways of interaction. There's 360 video where you're sitting, looking around. Other ones where you're invited to walk around room-based. There's mixed reality where the reality follows you, and there's not a clear way to do that. We have issues of hygiene, cords, environment. People with big hair is a huge problem, and charging and power. So if you want to keep these things going, it's really cool. One of the craziest things I did was do some VR work in an airplane. If you want to get some weird looks, put the goggles on in an airplane, but it runs your battery down very rapidly. So these are some trends that I see going, but increase integrated sensors. If you compare the mixed reality system Jonathan has, it's all in one thing compared to the Oculus Rift. You have to have the sensors out. And so all these things are changing, and keeping up with it and communicating what works or doesn't work within our community is really important. So I don't know what can come out of AstroViz, maybe something in the white paper talking about this as technology, and especially creating a way for us to be communicating what's working and doesn't working, and bringing content people with the consumers or the people who are delivering the content is really important. So thanks.
Are there a lot of questions? Yes? No? I'll go first. How did you set up your relationship with Oculus Research?
Well, we actually had a grant. There was a data center in Fort Worth. It turns out it's a new data center, and because it's so close to a major airport, a lot of people come through it. Yeah. So we got a grant from them, and then they connected us with people at Oculus Research. And Oculus Research were interested in learning social interactions in informal environments, and so they were looking for a partner anyway. So we're going to be putting a research grant in with them to get some Oculus Go's, which are a smaller version of the Oculus Rift, and working on social learning environments.
Cool. Other questions? Yep, Frank.
So I was up at Franklin, and they were trying to work with VR, and it was really, as I think you noted, it was just a lot of people waiting to use the 1 or 2 or 3 stations and such. Have you encountered any good solutions for trying to do any type of group environment in this?
Yeah, I think the one thing that really is powerful in that is to keep the experiences short and to have almost like one headset per experience. So if I want to see Orion, that'd be this headset. If I want to see whatever fly through, and actually like physically choose, versus when you get people to control, like you can do anything in the world, then you have to tell them an interface how to choose what to do, have to have an interface how to interact with the environment. And honestly, it's kind of better to keep it short and bite-sized, and when they walk up to it, they know what they're going to get. So that's powerful. But then again, I think really the biggest problem is this scalability, but keeping them short is really critical. There's also a fatigue factor. People don't want to spend an hour in VR. There are some crazy kids who will want to do that, but most people, a few minutes, they have got an amazing experience and they're happy to walk away. But that means one of the things I would also say to anybody who's producing VR content for the public is have a way to keep it short and bounded. So if there's a clear exit, it's like the people say, like, should I leave now? What's going on? There has to be like, ta-da, you're done, take it off, and that's really important.
Yeah, we found we've had the same lessons learned in developing our VR experience for Trappist, and I hope Robert and Keith, who is not here right now, will chime in. But so we have a guided experience for the Trappist tour that we take on the road. When we go out with our booth to conferences, and we limit it to about 2.5 minutes to 3. It's extending, but we're trying to fight that. Yeah. And then that is sort of a teaser to what will become a more interactive version that people can explore on their own time. But otherwise, yeah, if it's not guided, the time it requires to be in experience and to actually understand what's going on, it just takes way too long.
Yeah, right. It's this complicated interface too. It's like it happened here where you have a wand, you hit all these things, and by the time I learn it, my 2 minutes is over actually.
Yeah. But different applications for sort of different use cases.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Anyone online?
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
So in the sort of the 2 different types of VR, and partly in Microsoft calls mixed reality, is it's a 6 degree of freedom, not just 3. These, like you said about the Oculus's new portable unit, is jumping. Are those extra 3 degrees of freedom? Have you found them useful for the astronomy content?
Well, if we're talking about like 360 video, which is what some people are doing here, then it's irrelevant, right? For the other ones, I think my guess is that's one of the research topics I'd like to explore. Is that extra sense of freedom needed? Because if people translate, they have to walk, they have to not walk into things. It creates a whole other kind of environment. We need to know whether or not that's worth it, because the Oculus Go's are way cheaper, as you know, than the Rifts, and this mixed reality piece are trying to find the sweet spot for museums is both in the cost and the space it takes to deploy it is important. But that's a research question I think that's important to explore.
Just a very quick feedback on that is one thing we've noticed that people who have motion sickness problems, if they have near field objects, that extra degree is important for them controlling motion sickness. So.
Okay, thanks again. Next we have Emily Law, and it's going to be VR experiences with the solar system trucks.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank those who stopped by our demo earlier today. And also you have learned a little bit about the solar system tracks products from Brian yesterday. They talk about using these products for making movie to tell stories. So I just want to use this opportunity to quickly, give a very quick overview for those that, who haven't have a chance to look at it and talk to us about it. So the solar system tracks products is basically a family of web-based portals. Alex talked about, why we want, our capability to be web-based. And it basically provides a suite of interactive visualization and also analysis tool for users to be able to look at many products that we collected from past and also current missions for support of mission planning, scientific research, as well as public outreach. So we provide those data sets in standard geospatial data access APIs, allowing people to be able to access our data using OGC standards, and so that they can support a number of different user interface as well as number of different platforms. So for example, you saw it on the mobile apps, you saw it on the just a computer, and we serve it up to planetariums as well as touch tables, etc. So currently we have 3 that's available to support Mars, Moon, and also Vesta. So you just go to marstrack.jpl.nasa.gov, moontrack.jpl.nasa.gov, vestatrack.jpl.nasa.gov, and we are currently working on a number of others, including Phobos, Ceres, Titan, and icy moons as well. Those will be available later this year. So one of the features that we recently added is called the Experience Track VR. So what it does is if you go to the tool menu, select that, it will pop up with this window giving you information on what you ought to be doing. So basically what you do is, select draw a path, and then you go draw a path of your choice of any area on the surface of the body, the planetary body, either Mars or moons. And then once you're finished, it will pop up with a QR code. So all you need to do is use your camera phone and capture this URL, or you can send yourself an email. That the QR code would basically encode all the images that you have already selected before you draw the path, and then send it to a browser. And same thing as sending using the email, the URL, you can plug it into your browser, and it will be able to pick up all the maps that you have selected and the path you selected, and then it will be displayed in your mobile phone. And with this split screen technology, through the cesium that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and you will be able to just put your phone into a Google Cardboard or any type of cardboard VR goggles, and then you will be able to enjoy an immersive experience of fly over that particular path. So this is something everybody can do. Doug talked about low cost. So all you need is just your computer. You go on there and draw the path, and then you have your mobile. Everybody have a mobile phone, and then just use that to capture that, and then buy a Google Cardboard, $5, and then be able to enjoy that experience. So I think that's all. And this is the views that you can see from the once you put it in the Google Cardboard. Since you draw a path of starting and ending. So the first image that you will see there is really looking, behind where the starting point is. The last one is, looking behind where the end point. You actually see the path when you're looking through the goggles, and then you also see, the neighborhood surrounding area in 3D as well. So that's all that I have. Any questions? Carter.
Is your interocular adjusted to height?
Well, it's our DEM that we have. So yes.
Right. As you get closer, you bring your eyes together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
Doug, did you?
I was going to say, I know from talking to Brian that you have a way to export a 3D model for printing. Can you
Yes.
talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure. That's not really VR, but yes. In the same tool menu, there's the first tool is called Generate 3D File. And what you need to do is just, select an area of interest on the surface of the moon or the Mars or Vesta. And then it would pop up a window allowing you to, select whether you want to generate STL or OBJ file. And then once you download that file, send it to a 3D printer, and you'll get a 3D print just like the one that Brian showed up here.
I'll pass it around.
So, Brian?
Real quick, on the menu that came up for generating the VR path, there was a little spot for email. Can you mention something about that?
I thought I did. So you can actually, use your camera to capture the QR code, or you can use through that space, you can type in your email, and the URL will be sent to you. And then you can share that URL with your friends. Whoever has the Google Cardboard will be able to basically experience the tours immersively as well.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's thank Emily again. And next, Robert will tell us more about the TRAPPIST VR experience that was demoed downstairs and we were just discussing earlier.
Yeah, thank you. So not only a talk like this would start with the tagline, adapting TRAPPIST 1 for VR lessons learned, but the truth is we have not learned any lessons yet, or we've learned, but we are continuing to learn. We are inventing this from the inside out, and it is a really a dynamic field, and so help us figure this out as we go. So, of course, TRAPPIST 1, most of you have heard of this. It's one of the most, honestly, remarkable astrophysics discoveries, I think, in the last couple of years. 7 Earth-sized planets, one system. We actually know masses now more precisely than any other system of exoplanets. And we could really start to talk about what's going on here. So we want to engage people. And of course, for this, the press releases that we've done through Spitzer, we've generated a lot of graphics and assets to tell the story. So the trick is, what do we bring into VR? What part of this story do we tell? We've got surface views, we've got space views, we've got all sorts of data charts. Well, we decided to focus very much on just the system view. And how many people got a chance to see the TRAPPIST 1 VR? How many people are okay? So good. All right, 2/3. Partly we chose this because it kind of speaks to Spitzer's contribution on helping characterize these planets, along with all the other observatories that have been really hammering the system. Partly because Ariel's group has been pioneering the VR from the surface of exoplanets, so it's sort of our unique thing. But to get there, we have to ask, what is VR? And I do mean this in a broad sense, not the super technical sense, because VR, depending on who you talk to, means a lot of different things. It means doing things with real-time graphics. It means interactivity. It means stereoscopic feedback. It means 360 video on YouTube. It also means a lot of technologies. It's a headset, a Vive or Oculus or mixed reality. It's a stand-in go-to facility. It might just be hype. It might be pointless, right? So, but the thing that I think is central, of course, to VR is simply immersive. And that's really where we wanted to throw our focus. We want to create an experience that really gives you a sense of immersion and memory. So our initial goals were basically to build this immersive experience that we can use in public events, right? That's going to be our initial target. And what we want to do is prioritize what I would just call like long-term memorable engagement over factual learning goals, right? I don't care if you walk away knowing exactly how many Earth masses E or C or D is, right? But what I want people to walk away with is like, wow, this is like a really amazing system, and like I was there, and I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to tell my friends. So we had to make a lot of choices, some of which I've outlined here. Length of the show, the technology, how do we render it, or real time or pre-action do it? Is it an interactive show, or is it just more of a static show on wheels? So we definitely went for short, on the order of 3 minutes, because it's optimized for throughput at large events, right? Every VR event you ever go to, there's a huge line, and because it takes a long time to get people through. And we can always expand that later, right? We can make longer, more engaging experiences for that aren't involved in events. We went with doing real-time graphics in the game engine rather than doing pre-rendered graphics, because it's more flexible in the future. But the controversial thing we may have done for VR is we went with a static view rather than interactive view, because in particular for an event, there's a learning curve on interactivity. And with static view, you bypass all of that. So we also want to understand more about how interactivity really works with distraction versus learning, because a lot of times people want to kind of play the game. So it's been seen by a lot of people. It's been seen by pretend astronauts from The Expanse. It's been seen by members of Congress. It's been seen by certain NASA administrators. And what we're also trying to do is get metrics. So we're actually surveying our audiences. So this is a combination of the AAS and Yuri's Night data. And the main takeaways is we seem to hit the mark on it. Comfort, people are enjoying it, interest is high, and most people are happy with the tour length, and people could stand it to be a little longer. For the AAS, we started adding new questions. We're experimenting to trying to get at this. One of the interesting things is we want to correlate how much they knew about TRAPPIST-1 going in. We actually, sometimes you also learn things you didn't expect, like this was at AAS and someone answered a 2 on interest in astronomy. So I don't know. We'll have to factor that in. So as we go forward now, what we'll be able to do is we want to actually release this in the fall, and we can create longer experiences. We're also looking at what kinds of interactive experiences we can build into this that will let people explore at their own pace. But right now, we're just trying to see how it's going and get the metrics in hand so we know what's effective and what isn't, and we can use this to maybe justify more funding for VR in the future. So that covers my presentation.
I should add that the release is being timed so that it will be in celebration of the 15th anniversary of Spitzer. All right, questions?
So when is that?
August 25?
Yeah, 20. And give or take. Well, we have to make sure we get all the time to get into the Oculus store, and hopefully the Vive store if we have time to do the cross-platform support.
Right. And it'll be YouTube 360 too, right?
Yeah, and we'll put a rendered version on YouTube 360 at the same time as well.
Yeah, so what's your feeling about the production time to do this? Is it something that you can kind of work into your workflow so when you make some of all the assets for press releases?
Well, Keith just joined us in December, and we're trying very hard not to completely destroy and burn him out in this, because he has been devoting I'd say the bulk of his time to this so far. And it is this interleave with the other Spitzer support work that we're doing. Would you have an estimate, Keith, on how much time, like a couple months of? Yeah, and that's just to get. And we also realize if we try interactivity, that's going to add a lot of development time because we have to build mechanisms for handling that. So the static experience, actually, the planetarium mode gives us a little bit of freedom to control and bypass some of the production costs.
Yep.
What's your feeling on you get more data and then the planets change, and now you've got this the VR experience that hasn't been released yet. So how do you feel about it? How do you feel like the conversation should go on between science happening in real time, especially TRAPPIST, where there's a new paper out every 3 or 4 days, it seems like?
Exactly. Well, one of the things we try to capture in the narration is to remind people, that we're showing them speculations of what's there. And so if we do our job well, we can make it a little more long burn on this by simply saying, this is a set of speculations of what may be there, and that it's an evolving story. One of the things we talked about doing, we haven't implemented, was actually going between the art we generated for the first press release when we had first guesses at densities versus the art we generated for the second press release, where our densities were actually much more precise, and we changed everything in the system based on best models that time. And we actually thought it might be fun to actually go visit a planet and see it fade between one version and another to just basically tell that, and that tomorrow it may look different, and when we get there, who knows?
I love that. I think that's a great idea.
Keith, tomorrow we're gonna get that in tomorrow, right?
What's that?
Jackie likes it, so tomorrow we'll be ready to. Okay. Yeah.
Keith is actually 3 different people. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we've got Ryan Stevenson. He's going to tell us about UI and UX and VR, changing perspectives.
I apologize, I'm horrible at public speaking, so I get lost a lot.
I don't know.
Where's the arrow keys? Is it F5 that turns us on? Anybody know? I'm trying to play the, how do I play it, the first one?
From the first one. Oh, you have to select the first one.
Sorry.
There, and then. Okay. There you go.
All right, I'm Brian Stevenson. I work at the STEAM Innovation Lab, and I do a lot of their front-end interface, and I focus a lot on user experience and user interface. I do find a lot when it comes to VR that a lot of groups have really talented programmers and really talented scientists, and they're building VR experiences, and what you end up with is a really cool visualization, but the user has a really hard time figuring it out. I did want to say that the VR experiences I saw here today were really good. Trappist, you got that. The ring was amazing. It is a really good example of a passive experience. It was actually very well done. And the JWST work was a really good example of interactive and a good way to do that. So this kind of talk isn't for them. So first of all, doing good UI and UX in VR is actually really hard. It doesn't seem as hard when you get into it, but if you don't come from a game development background and you come from just an application or from a science background, you don't really realize what you're in for. And part of the problem is that almost every experience is going to be different. So what works for one experience may not work for another. I fully intend on taking the rings from you guys, from Trappist. However, it actually might not work for what we're doing, but we'll figure that out when we get to it. And UI and UX right now is a moving target. The hardware changes, the headset changes, the grips change. You have to completely change the way you think about things almost on a monthly basis. So a few months ago, we were all told that you can't move people artificially and you should teleport everywhere. Now people are like, oh, teleportation isn't probably the best. And then Klein Bee came out and everybody's like, oh, look, you can do it. And so the thoughts and the theories behind it keep changing. And a lot of this is because of motion sickness and comfort level. So if you're moving people artificially, and Trappist did not give me any motion sickness, but a lot of times if you're yawing, if you guys know what yaw, pitch, and roll are, don't ever do that in VR. Don't give your user the ability to do that. And again, every project is different, so I might be lying to you. But that if you move the horizon and they don't move, it's horrible. Don't do it. But that's still things that you have to figure out, especially if you're in a zero-G environment. You think, oh, I want it to be real. They will get sick. Don't do it.
Just like
what? Okay, so
space, that would be right.
Yes. So when it comes to actual interactive, I was going to talk about 360 video and passive, but I'm going to focus on interactive. Do not reinvent the door. In game development, there's a problem called the door problem. You can look it up. There's a really good Kotaku article on it. And it talks about how a simple thing like a door is actually really complicated in game development. And so I'm kind of taking it on its head. Don't reinvent the door. In VR, do not bring a user to a door and have them open a menu and say, open door. No. Just open the door. So when I talk about UI and VR, take all of your UI and put it in the environment. It's much harder for AstroViz people because your environment is nothing. But so I feel bad telling you guys that. But realistically, if there's a door, have them open the door. If there's a button, they should press the button. They shouldn't open a menu to do those sorts of things. Big menus in VR, like just things that you would use a laser for, should be your last resort. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but try to find other ways to do it first. Spatial audio is huge. I know that Trappist is using spatial audio. It can give your user cues. If somebody snaps here, you'll know exactly where this is coming from if your eyes are closed. And in VR, that's gigantic. So you guys had the ring and the audio. Fantastic. Good job. So also audio is about, I'm an audio snap. So it's about 50% of your immersive experience. Do not discount audio. It's hugely important for two reasons. You can give more information, and at the same time, the user can be led easier with proper audio. If they're already being led, it doesn't matter. But if you have a sandbox situation, audio can be really helpful. And everything in your experience is part of your UI, whether you want it to be or not. So this is a clean room that we did for the MMS spacecraft. The user can't get to this perspective, but I wanted to give you an overview. We made it available for them to pick up all the instruments and put them back on the satellite and kind of build a satellite. It was gonna be like a game. And this is a 1-to-1 scale of that clean room. So if you're a 5'10", 6 foot, adult, this is about the view you get. And this was fantastic. Like everybody was doing it right up until we had bring your kid to work day. And they all saw it like this. And none of them could reach the instruments. And they're all going, and their parents are picking them up, and there's such a failure of UI, and I'm like, oh God, what do I do? So we went into Uni and just dropped the satellite into the floor so that they could all interact with it. So those like lessons learned, and you don't think about those things. But I also didn't want to like have like some weird hovering thing and have them, I don't know, we could have gotten around it a bunch of different ways. I have 1 minute left. So if you're going to develop VR, you need to use other people's VR. You need to do the bad stuff, and you need to do the good stuff. Lone Echo is a really good example of cool space VR that was done well. They kind of changed Oculus's idea on what it means to move in VR. So definitely check out Lone Echo. They have great menus. Some of it's not so good. Google Earth, it is fantastic and horrible at the same time. Get in there and yaw yourself and then take it off and go, I'll never do that again. Google Earth is fantastic, but again, the motion will make you sick. You can get used to it, but it's also amazing. It'll change geography classes. Elite Dangerous, you probably will never play, but if you do, it's a great space game. They have menus that are controlled from joysticks. The motion is good, can still make you sick. They have a really good heads-up display, and it's in space. Climby, really innovative movement. It's very cartoony, but I think we could all learn a lot from how they're moving people in a non-traditional way. Universe Sandbox is a fantastic failure of UI. It is super cool if you've ever used it. In VR, it is the hardest thing on earth, and I can never figure it out. If any of you guys are experts at it, I'd love to get some training. But their UI is terrible. And of course, Tilt Brush and Quill are really good examples of UI that after a learning curve that isn't too much, because God, Universe Sandbox is way too much. But UI and Quill are fantastic examples of UI where once you figure it out, they work really, really well. And it's really up to us to determine whether or not we go that far.
Okay, thanks. Questions for Brian? Yes.
For my ignorance, what are UI and UX?
Sorry, user interface is UI and UX is user experience. They're very similar and they usually cross-pollinate, but you can have UX without UI.
Yep.
Speaking of your little sitcom, that's pretty much a vibe. It was tracking the actual height of the kids.
Correct, yeah. If you're doing room scale, it tracks your height, and you can't make them bigger, taller, because it doesn't make sense. If you make them taller and they drop something on the floor, they can't reach down and get it, because then they're 2 feet off the floor, and so they'll just hit the floor.
Okay.
So,
and you said you've already fixed that, or you're just thinking about that for the future?
my fix at the time was to go into Unity and pull the thing into the floor.
Okay.
So that was not a good fix, but it solved it for that day. We are working on ways to what can we do. When you're building a one-to-one clean room, it doesn't make sense because they weren't expecting kids to go in there and play with a satellite. Well, I just didn't consider that that would be a problem. So we will come up probably with some kind of scaffolding for smaller people, or maybe just get rid of the gantry and drop
ladder
it.
in there?
Yeah, ladders are weird in VR. I would avoid a ladder in VR.
Any questions from online? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So we've been focusing on the visual side of perception, but now we're going to switch over to more of the audio side. And so let's try. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, that's not the first side. Yeah.
Give it away.
Everyone's ruin it. Yeah. Tip for everyone: when you save your document, start on the first slide when you save it.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to tell you a bit about System Sounds. It's a science outreach project involving sonification and visualization that I started. And it really all started with TRAPPIST-1. You've heard a lot about that today. If it's not your favorite system, it really, really should be. It's also the system that changed my life. And so it's exciting for many, many reasons. But what's most exciting to me is that TRAPPIST-1 is a resonant chain. It's the only one of its kind where we have all 7 planets locked together in a simple musical pattern. So for every 2 orbits of the outermost planet, the next one completes 3 orbits, and then 4, 6, 9, 15, and 24. So they're all locked together in a fixed repeating pattern. If you convert this into music, you're going to get very interesting and complex rhythms. And if you speed it up by millions of times, you'll get very interesting and complex musical harmony. And so I made a video of this. I'll show you a little clip in case you haven't heard it, but these are the actual rhythms and pitches of the planetary system. No sound, no sound.
Pause, because we didn't remember to plug this in. Okay. We're going to go back a slide. And
Okay.
Then
We'll crank it.
there, give that a shot. Try not to blow out a speaker.
Isn't it already blown?
Yeah.
And then things really get nuts. You have to watch the full video. But many people are amazed at this and wonder how it could happen, or is it a coincidence or something? And the story, the analogy is really just perfect. If you get an orchestra together, they can't just all sit down and play. Of course, they have to tune their instruments so that their instruments resonate with their neighbors' instruments. And there's other things too. They have to be, conducted and start at the right time, be in the right place. And so that happened to TRAPPIST-1. Early on, when the planets were forming inside their gas disk, they can migrate, they can slide around and adjust to each other's orbits so that they can remain stable in this very close, tight configuration. They're so close that if they weren't finely tuned in every aspect of their orbit, they would very quickly destroy themselves. They would crash into each other. So it's music that's keeping this system alive and any of its possible inhabitants. And so after this, we formed something called System Sounds with my friend Andrew, who's a musician. We played in the same band together for over 10 years. And Dan Tamayo was in the office next door. And while I was working on this, he was writing the paper showing that it's the musical nature of the system that keeps it stable. And so we combined for the press release and got it out. But he is just brilliant, brilliant astrophysicist. And so since then, we've tackled many more systems. We did a whole suite on Saturn for the sad demise of Cassini last fall. Did its moons, its rings, the oscillations of the planet itself, with Matt Hedman on that. We played a scale with the resonant rings, resonances with some of the moons. We did fly-throughs of the spiral density wave. And direct sonification. Pretty nightmare-inducing. We made hip-hop with the Pleiades light curves that were released last fall. And my personal favorite is we found out that the inner solar system is playing Radiohead's True Love Waits with the asteroid belt as the base. To have you, baby. And we've also gotten a lot into accessibility and making astronomy more accessible to the visually impaired. So I've done some tactile booths. Here I made a 2-foot-long wood carving of Saturn's rings that people can follow along with, feel the ridges as they listen to a sonification of the rings and as they watch the visualization. So it's the same data in 3 senses. And the last thing that we're working on now is, this is the update of the night sky sonification I showed you yesterday. This is for an all-night outdoor art exhibition we're doing this fall. We're going to build our own geodesic dome and have this playing for 12 hours in real time, the actual stars that are above, sonified in many different ways throughout the 12 hours. So it's a way to bring people together outside and experience the night sky in a new way. And I posted this image in the AstroViz Facebook page, and I actually forgot to flip around the Milky Way image, so there was the Magellanic Cloud beside Cygnus, so thanks for not publicly shaming me for that mistake. Okay, and that's all I have for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, and I'll say we have been big fans of their work in the Switzer office. So, are there any questions?
sonification of the radio head and the inner solar system? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so if you take the inner 4 planets, they're not in resonance, so they're not very pure notes, but if you play them on the nearest piano note, it just turns out that the chord they're playing and the rhythms they're playing are extremely similar to the opening piano of True Love Waits. And then with that mapping, you have the asteroid belts. You kind of choose bass notes out of that to play the actual song. That's how we did it. So actually the way we found that is we just put the solar system through the exact same code that made TRAPPIST-1. It happened to be in the right key and at the right tempo for True Love Waits, and it just popped out in the end. Yeah.
Have you told Radiohead?
I emailed Tom York and didn't hear back.
Tom at Radiohead.
Yeah, the wood carving of Saturn's rings, where did you get the data for that?
It's one of the images. It's like a ring mosaic, a complete slice. I'm not sure who made it. Maybe someone here made it.
I mean,
oh.
You didn't laser, you did it by hand?
No. It's a laser cut. And there's an astronomer in Canada who has he does wood carvings of images of Saturn. And so I just took this image and scaled it and designed it with Braille and everything and sent it to him, and he sent it back. It's really cheap. You can get him to make your own for $80.
What's the name of that?
His name is James Somerville Edgar. And, yeah, his name's on my webpage if you can want to dig that up.
So I've got to ask you, you've gotten 3 senses. Any ideas of how to bring in like smell or taste?
So yes, we at our last, we had the group of blind people at our last tactile exhibit. We passed around meteorites, and as you know, they have a very distinct metallic smell. I told them not to taste them because these rocks have been handled by 1,000 people.
I congratulate you having an answer to that. Any final questions? All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, this one, right?
That's me, yes. Thanks.
First slide.
Right, sorry. Great. So I'm excited to distribute stickers around the room and talk to you about a new website I launched called Astronomy Sound of the Month. All right, so what Astronomy Sound of the Month is a website featuring monthly sonifications produced from astronomy data, along with brief explanations written by astronomers. And so I'm going to take my time today to share with you some of the sonifications I've been involved with, and they're all up on the website, and they have full explanations there, so check them out. The first one is called the Milky Way Blues. So here we are in the outskirts of the Milky Way galaxy, and we orbit the galaxy once every 250 million years. And right now we're going in that direction, and we can point telescopes along a certain sight line through the galaxy. And because the galaxy is made up of, in addition to planets and stars, gas, we often observe gas blobs, and we can detect the component of their motion directed along our line of sight, because spectroscopy is sensitive to that. And in some cases, depending on where the blob of gas is in its orbit, it's either moving away from us or moving towards us, right? Okay. So Mark Hayer, an astronomer at UMass, took spectroscopic observations from radio telescopes and mapped the line of sight motion of these gas blobs to pitch. So in this version, high notes correspond to blobs moving away from us, and low notes will correspond to blobs moving towards us. And he did this for many, many sight lines through the galaxy, stepping through them, assigning individual blobs to notes to play the Milky Way Blues, which lets you hear the rotation of our galaxy. The next one I want to share with you, I'm going to play all the supernova ever discovered from the year 1985 to 1994. And the reason this is an interesting time to highlight is because the brightest supernova we've ever discovered happened in 1987. And in 1991, we had the bright idea of putting digital cameras, or CCDs, on telescopes. So keep your eye out for what happens then. On the upper left here, I'm just keeping track of time. And on the upper right, we're going to look at the cumulative number of supernova we've ever discovered. All right. Different symbols correspond to different types of supernova. And the more xylophone notes you hear, and the wider their range in pitch, the more and more supernova there are being discovered. And just to keep it fun, I'm going to have them play Champagne Supernova by Oasis.
Someday you will find me caught beneath the landslide in a champagne supernova in the sky. Someday you will find me caught beneath the landslide in a champagne supernova. A champagne supernova, 'cause people believe that they're gonna get away for the summer. But you and I will live and die, the world's still spinning round, we don't know why.
Cool. And these days, astronomers discover like a supernova every hour, which makes me feel super unproductive. All right. And the last one I'm going to share with you is the accelerated expansion of the universe. And so I've converted that into, into an endlessly rising tone, where on the left, I keep track of time into the future. So in 14 seconds, the universe is twice as old as it is today. And on the right, I keep track of how much bigger it's become. So when the 1 becomes a 2, a 1 yardstick has become a 2 yardstick. And I apologize for the following 30 seconds of your life that you will never get back. I've got a version of that goes on for 12 hours, which is the longest video duration allowed by YouTube. Yeah. All right, so my final slide here, just going to lay out very quickly my hopes and dreams for the website. I want to highlight astrophysics research using sound in a fun way, be accessible to non-scientists and those with visual impairments, provide educational resources to supplement course curricula, and solicit contributions from the astronomy community. So if you've got a cool visualization that you think would benefit from sonification, get in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you. We have questions. So how did you go about your selection process? I mean, you had to get started at some point. I mean, how do you?
Yeah, you just kind of have an idea and iterate on it until it turns into something. I don't have a good answer for that, right? Sorry.
You say you strive for open source. What fraction are under CC0 or similar license?
So I don't know what that means, but maybe I should. I think everything is free use and available, with the exception of the vocal track for Champagne Supernova, which is like you can use it on YouTube and they're cool with it. But everything's on GitHub, all the code. Yeah.
Can you explain the sound that uses the CMB again? It sounded like there was always a low pitch and a high pitch, not just one.
Yeah, it's an auditory illusion called a Shepherd tone, where you do a frequency sweep and you're always dropping and introducing tones that are just barely audible. And so your brain doesn't really notice these tones entering and leaving.
And I thank you for not blowing out the speakers by just adhering to sounds that were
sure.
Was there any question on Slack?
Yes.
From Sarah Rice. Greg, what specific plans do you have to use sound to improve accessibility to blind and visually impaired scientists and other visually impaired audiences via open source?
So I guess I didn't have too much in mind for blind and visually impaired scientists because I'm only aware of two. One who's retired, the other is Wanda Diaz-Merst. And there is some sonification software available, like called Xsonify, but for just more the visually impaired public, I'm working on incorporating some of this into the classroom to develop a course curriculum that I will then go to the California School for the Blind in Fremont to try to incorporate some of this material into their science curriculum.
All right, well, thank you again.
Great, thanks.
I doubt I saved it on the first slide.
Yeah, I'm checking those out. You did. First slide. Good for you. And there.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Shane Murbeck. So I'm a composer and a sound artist. And my work kind of spans a few different things in media art. There's sometimes it's a performance with both sound and visual and some sculpture. Sometimes it's an installation either in a gallery or site specific out in the world somewhere. And sometimes it's a collaboration with more traditional forms of kind of acoustic music. So one thing that ties all the pieces together is a strong sense of narrative and of storytelling. And while these are all pretty new forms of music and some of them are pretty technologically advanced, to me I see a strong tie to historical forms of music. So does this one work? No. Okay. So the idea of using instrumental music as a storytelling tool has been around for quite some time, actually. And my partner Emily and I, who collaborate together a lot, often see a lineage with what in the classical music world is called program music. So this is music where you have an explicit narrative that's being told by instrumental music. They had symphony orchestras to do it. These days we have some different tools, which I'll talk about in a bit. One that's a kind of core use for me and a core expertise for me is sonic space. So this is using 3D audio, so a sphere of loudspeakers or large arrays of loudspeakers. You can do it over headphones, as we've talked about a little bit. But this allows you to use kind of instinctual, what we call psychoacoustic cues of spatial hearing. So we always hear in 3D and we have that expectation of the natural world. But when you build an array like this, you can use it in composition or in storytelling. I'm happy to talk to anyone about more 3D audio stuff for planetariums, by the way, as an aside. The other one, more apropos to this conference, is data. So if you think about using sound to represent data as sonification versus visualization, I think there are some arguments about setting aside the blind and visually impaired community, why wouldn't you just visualize it? You can understand so much more data at once. You can understand a lot instantaneously with vision. But I think where sound has an advantage is in two things. One, it's very evocative. So when you use musical themes, I think people have an emotional response to music that is pretty visceral. You don't have to be an expert listener or a musician to have it. And the other is anything that takes time. So when we have a musical element introduced to us, we anticipate that it's going to be a certain amount of time to experience it because it has to be, right? So whereas a visual, you might think that you get all the information even if you don't. With music, you have an expectation that you'll experience it. So the project that I'd like to showcase as part of all this is the Orbit Pavilion. So if anyone's around tomorrow still, we're going to go visit this. This is at the Huntington Gardens, just down the road. And so this is a collaboration with JPL, with the studio. So David Delgado will be there tomorrow, and I think Dan Goods will actually be there too, potentially. So I was commissioned as the composer, the sound system designer, and the coder for this project. And what this project does is take some of the data that was being shown earlier with Eyes on the Earth. So it showcases 17 different Earth science satellite missions and takes their trajectory and maps them onto this loudspeaker system. So I'm actually going to play, let me see if I'll be able to navigate here. I'm going to play this as I talk, because otherwise I won't get through it all. So again, it's not a direct sonification of the mission science, right? But it is meant to evoke what the mission is doing. So the piece is in two movements. this is a sped up version of all the data. So this is about a day's worth of trajectory data per day. And what this movement is meant to evoke is something about the missions. So you have satellites that are studying the atmosphere, you have satellites that are studying the Earth, satellites that are studying the sea. So the water satellites are represented by the ocean sounds, the atmosphere satellites are represented by the kind of high wind sounds of blowing glass, and then the Earth satellites are represented by the musical instruments. So it's not happening here, but if we were in this dome, and hopefully you will be tomorrow, these sounds are swirling all around you, representing the trajectories of all those satellites. We do it in the sped up version because it takes the satellite about an hour and a half to get around the Earth. So if we did it all in real time, it would be very slow. But this gives you a sense of the patterns and how they're all grouped together. And in a minute, it will switch to the real time version. So now it's switching to real-time data. So when this happens in the space, the sounds play one by one and they overlap in random ways to create new and unique harmonies to make the piece loop in a kind of an endless fashion. But so when these sounds play, they'll play either above you or beside you or below you. And when you point to the sounds that you hear, you're pointing to the exact location of that satellite at that moment. So when you're out there in the Huntington Gardens, amongst this beautiful botanical garden, you can see the skies with the oculus. You're taking your version of that natural experience and extending it out 1,000 miles into the Earth. If you come tomorrow, you can experience it. Thank you. Q&A if you want, just turn it down.
So, do we have any questions about the location of orbiting satellites?
How position dependent is it when you're deciding?
It's actually not too bad. It's a lot of spatial audio systems are very center based, so it kind of resolves to points in the center of the sphere. But I use the technique for this where you basically all the loudspeakers, you kind of tessellate the sphere, and you if a sound is coming from over there, it's only playing from the loudspeakers in that area, and so that means you can walk over to the side and it will still be there. Of course, if you're right to the side, it will not be quite close. But we were talking about this yesterday. The resolution of hearing is really good in the horizontal plane and not so great in the vertical plane. But I don't know actually what the resolution of pointing is. So pretty much I think that if you saw a dot and you pointed to it and you heard the sound, you would be pointing to the same spot.
I'm curious, how do you R&D and beta test? How do you actually just build this structure out and figure out how many speakers you need in order to get resolution? How did that whole process go?
Yeah, so I've been in my other part of my life is that I'm working in architecture, designing buildings for sound and also immersive sound systems. So I've designed a lot of these systems for a number of different projects. We also have a studio at work where we essentially mocked up this piece. So there's a studio in LA where I would do a draft of the composition, come down with Dan and David and with Michael Green, who we were talking about over lunch, and they would kind of review the composition and provide comments on the full experience of it. And this is actually the third installation of it. So it would happen at the World Science Festival, and then the Intrepid Museum, and then this piece. So it's evolved over time.
All right. Well, thank you.
Cheers.
So we're done from the eyes. We've hit the focus on the ears. Let's move on down to the fingers. I hope that didn't sound creepy. That was creepy.
Not until you said that.
So let's see, is your, where's your toggle? Oh, that's under your name at the top. And let's make sure it's on the first slide. It is.
Oh, look at that.
And play.
So Nance and I have been working with 3D printing some of the high energy objects that they have 3D data on, and basically we are either really bad at it or we're pushing the envelope. So this is just kind of like a story here about how sometimes 3D printing is really great and sometimes it's just it's really frustrating. It doesn't always work. And so we're trying to bring it to people so that they can actually touch these objects and get a sense of it, especially like visually impaired people or just people who learn better by feeling something. And we're trying to bring it to kids so they can learn about 3D modeling. And but we also like them to know about the frustrations that we've encountered because they will also encounter them. So here is some of our 3D representations of Cassiopeia A. And I was thinking about this when, I don't know where Travis went, but when he was talking about misconceptions and how you can reinforce them, I was thinking about like what kind of disservice are we actually doing when we're printing these nebulous dynamic objects as hard plastic things that you can hold in your hand. And like, I always have to kind of qualify that when I pass around a model to the kids, but I don't know, are they touching the model and still thinking like, this is a thing that you could reach out and touch? I don't know what to do about that. Anyway, here are my lady hands taking out the Cassiopeia A from the MakerBot, which is one of the first printers we used, which I have broken. This is what some of the models that have worked out look like, and one of our problems was to like not reinforce it as something that you couldn't get through and see, you know that it's a shell more than like a solid ball. And so I can pass this around where it's like I've got this little magnet version where you can go in and find the neutron star, and you can take the jets off too, which is another one of the problems that we're trying to solve because they always break off. Like every model we print, it takes us like 48 hours to print this model, and then the jets all break, and we're losing that whole story, that whole piece of the story. And then the other part about Cassiopeia A is we've just inherited this powder printer, and now we can print it in color, which is really exciting because it gives us all that data that we have color information for. That's basically a Cassiopeia A. Here's what it's supposed to look like. Here's what it's supposed to look like, the one that we're passing around. Here's a fail. This one failed because file corruption, I think. It failed at exactly the same spot twice. So I finally realized after many, many hours that it was because the file actually just like didn't save completely. So it's just like little things like that are easily overlooked. And 2 minutes left. We're only on cafe. Show you so many ways that we failed. This is how the powder printer version is supposed to look. Or I like that one. That's a like one that worked out. And then we're also, I didn't bring a copy of Supernova 1987A, but Frank, you'll recognize this if you're awake. And some of it's 3D iterations. Here it is being printed and taken off the printer with a spatula. And then we run into this other problem, which is the supports. I don't know how many of you have done any 3D printing, but the support structure that holds, especially with 1987A, it's got so much delicate structure to it that when you go and you take all the stuff off with the pliers, you end up breaking off actual data, and that can be fun. Doing all the talking 1 minute, I'll let you talk now.
Where are we? This next model we did with the powder printer, and this is something new technology that we're working with. We actually really find the powder printer exciting because once the model is hardened, it doesn't break as easily. However, getting it to the point of hardening it is tricky because you basically are excavating out this material from powder, and it's extremely fragile at that point. We're finding with 3D printing, we make a lot of mistakes, and you end up having a ton of failures. I'm just trying to go quickly. This is being passed around on this side of the room. This is a model of a star system at NOVAD, and you're seeing the blast wave, which is nice and smooth, and the ejecta, which is kind of bumpy. We find this is a great educational tool for kids, but as April said, we sometimes worry about, are they thinking that this is a solid object rather than something that's a little less tactile? And I think we're running out of time.
Questions?
Question. Thank you. Have you tried using VFA for your lattice, PVA for your lattice?
Yeah, I didn't.
Yes.
I didn't actually finish that thought, but yes, that was what we kind of came to the conclusion of. That was a solution to that problem.
So what are you doing to teach scale when you have these things in the classroom?
To teach scale of
Yeah,
the
like,
actual
you know, you're
object.
scaling this up, like even if it's the jet to the central star, or this thing they're holding in their hand versus now you've shrunk it down to this size kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we always mention the actual scale of it, but that's such a strange concept. I don't know that I have a good way to teach that.
And usually, for example, on the Cas-A object, I will show that if you go from one end to the other, that's going to take, about 10 light years, 10 to 20 light years. And getting the kids to wrap their mind around the idea of that scale is difficult. So we try to mention scale, we try to get that across to them, but it's hard when it's such a large concept.
There's did you try to print the dark matter structure from simulations?
We didn't have a dark
No.
matter structure in that.
I don't know. I know
Just wondering if you've tried simpler astrophysical objects.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Those usually go a lot better.
Exoplanets, for
Yeah,
instance.
moons are great. Asteroids really usually work out very well.
This is a beautiful moon.
Well, they fail sometimes too.
that, failed miserably because we ran out of filament. This was after 6 days.
Oh.
One of my favorite.
6 days. It's about this big.
We do the spacecraft, the Challenger spacecraft, and that one doesn't seem to fail as much because of the square edges. But then there was this.
This was a massive failure.
One day.
String theory.
Have you tried semi-transparent materials so you can make shells?
On some of these, we have used semi-transparent materials.
It's not as transparent as it should be.
Yes, that's the problem.
But
It's
there
really
probably
not.
is something better that we haven't tried.
Even with the powder print? I haven't used that one.
You can't do it with the powder printer,
That wouldn't be transparent.
but we could do it with the plastics.
All right, so out of time for questions now, but toss it to Slack or we can pick up later. And come up on our, thank you again. And now for our final talk of this session before the discussion. Go. Let's see, what's your file name? Oh yeah. I'm not seeing your. Oh, here it is. There we go. Got it.
Miguel.
Yeah, your name was at the end. It was cropped off initially. And let's go to your first slide. And then play. There we go.
Well, hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk about some experiences with visualization as a driver for scientific discovery, which is a little bit the other way around as the way it has been shown in the last day. We have seen these amazing examples how to use visualization to present scientific results, to present scientific data. But I use it the other way around. But this is a little bit random, so also what I will be showing I try to put it as a clean process, but this is actually a very random process. And the idea is that we have this amazing machine that is very good at pattern recognition, millions of years of evolution. So we can actually use it, take advantage of it. So I'm going to start with a story. A few years ago, like 11 years ago, a friend of mine and I started what will be called a startup now. We were developing interactive screens where the users will go in front of the screen and they could interact in a natural way. And we were trying to sell this technology. So that is my wife with the very early demos. Is there a way to control the video from here? Do you know? Because the video is quite long, actually.
Okay, just advance the, or do you need to skip?
I need to skip on the video.
Let's see. There we go.
Oh, yeah,
you can.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to skip until this part. So one of the things that we wanted to sell at the time, we wanted, we approached this company, and we developed this system that you are walking on a mall, and then when you pass in front of the screen, you see a product that you want to sell. So, okay, so we did more things. I'm just going to show you some technology that we developed. So this interactive screen, here you get into a sample painting, then it becomes interactive. So there is my son playing with an interactive screen. For a while, he thought that all the screens were interactive, and then he was in front of a TV and nothing. So now it doesn't look like much, but this was 11 years ago. So at the time, it was quite unique technology. So the startup failed completely, and I ended up with some very nice code and some nice tools. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use it for science. And I made this screen where you see a memory simulation, and then my wife is injecting particles into the simulations, and the particles follow the velocity field. So this was really nice for outreach. So the kids love it. We show this at physics fairs, many places. But then I thought, okay, I'm actually learning something. Every time I put my hands and inject particles, I see these flows of matter. So then I took an memory simulation, and what you see there is the dark matter. You see here the clusters, filaments, voids. So I'm going to put on top of that the velocity field. So you see that the velocity field that formed this cosmic web is like these cells, these bubbles. We found that this velocity field can actually break into subfields and subfields. And when we put the galaxies back into the original image, we see that the galaxies sit at the intersection of these filaments. And based on that, we made a poster with Julieta Guillen and Mark Subarao. We won the first place at the International Visualization Challenge. That was really nice, and we ended up in the front cover of Science. And from this idea, we developed a galaxy formation model. So this came first from advertising, then this physical model of flows, and then we come up with a model to explain why galaxies stop forming stars around redshift 2. The model is quite simple, and we are very happy with it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about 3D printing. So this is my future stained glass window. Here. It's a cosmological simulation, again, clusters, filaments, there are 3D walls, and these are voids. So I want to follow the evolution of the voids to relate that to properties of the galaxies. So more or less what I want to have is this. So you see here the connectivity of the voids. This is a graph representing the connectivities. In the background, you will see the cosmic web emerging. And you see this looks very messy. And it looks very messy because it is very difficult to connect a void at a time. This is time evolution, sorry. And then the same void at a different time because the void changed, some void disappeared. So how do I do that? And I actually couldn't find the solution until I thought, okay, I had a 3D printer at the time in my lab. That's okay. I'm going to make a 3D print of that. So what I did is I ran a 3D simulation, and this simulation has only two spatial dimensions, on X, Y, and Z is time. So when you do that, okay, let me see. I'm going to pass it in a while. So when I saw it, I had one of these aha moments. Suddenly I realized that the structures in time, this is a 2D universe. In this 2D universe, a structure is actually a 3D universe, a 3D structure. So a void in 2D is actually a three-dimensional void, and we make slices in time to specific times. So what I'm doing now is identifying voids in 4 dimensions and then making cuts in 3 dimensions, and that solved the problem. And I could only find the solution when I print the problem. So I also made another one. This didn't help it on anything, but just looks nice. Okay, how much time do I have?
Basically none.
None? Oh,
wrap it up quick.
Okay, so very fast. This is the cosmic web, and this is another system, a similar system. So I just want to ask you, do you have any idea? This is the universe, and this is another cellular system. Do you have any idea where this could be? Cucumbers? No. That would be too obvious. Okay, now, any idea?
Beer.
No, okay. It's actually the foam in a piece of the top layer of coffee. So there is actually a relation between them. Both are cellular systems, and we can explain the cosmic web as cellular systems. So on that, I'm writing actually a paper making this relation between the cellular properties of any cellular system and the cosmic web. And just to end up, I'm going to show you just something that is just, I'm going to abuse a little bit. So this is a technique using machine learning and artificial intelligence called style transfer. You take an image, take another one, and reinterpret this image in terms of the other one. So I thought, okay, that's very nice. I've been doing machine learning in my work, in my serious work. So I thought I'm going to apply this to a galaxy. So this is the same galaxy interpreted as starry night and the keys. So then once I had that, I thought, okay, I'm going to do it for a bunch of galaxies, and then I'm going to put it in a movie. So then I made a flight to the Van Gogh universe.
Sweet. So we can let the movie roll as we take questions.
Yes.
Thank you. Questions out there? Do we see any coming from Slack? I'm sorry, I would ask something, but I'm too brain dead right now, too. So,
well, thank you.
So let's thank our speakers and. Oh, sorry, yeah, question.
Well, I mean, I know like in visualization in general, it's always hard. You always get that question like, can you give me an example of when you actually learned anything from the visualization? And I think this is pretty neat that there's an example of actually learning something significant from 3D printing. Do you have any other examples like that? So,
This is the only one.
Or from visualization is what in general.
Yeah, 3D printing, but it's a very special thing because we all visualize. Well, we are into visualization, but there is this extra component, the touching. So children, when they are little, they put everything in their mouth and they are touching because you can actually use this extra sense to get a better understanding. And I think it's the same for us. When you not only see, but when you touch the model, you really get a deeper understanding of the model. And that's what happened when I print the thing. I thought, oh yeah, that's the solution.
Yeah, I was going to say that, I went to a conference where we were debating astronomically about the structure of things in the Galactic Center, and I had to create some 3D models, in the computer. But if we had physical models, I think it actually can help people to understand the structure and relationships of things. Because I've seen conferences where over beer at a bar, they'll create, kind of a weird stick figure or something, and I definitely think that the tactile thing really has a connection to create a community discussion around a system.
Yeah, it's really important. So there is this discussion if using tablets is healthy for little kids, and so because you actually need this extra sense. And I really think we learned something else when we print it, when we 3D print it.
So, all right. Well, let's just open up to any general conversation. Anything that anyone got interested in while we were discussing it. I got to say, I have been seeing people work with data sonification for a very, very long time, even back in grad school. And I have to admit, every time I hear that phrase data sonification, it usually was a very suppressed eye roll because it was a lot of it was very unmotivated to search for. But I think we've come so far, and the things that we've seen presented today on both, taking data and abstractly representing it in terms of sound, or I should say non-traditionally representing it in terms of sound, in terms of shape and structure, is actually kind of remarkable that we are developing a more powerful visual lexicon. And the idea of connecting up the shapes we do in VR to the shapes we print in 3D to create like more accessible experiences is actually just kind of remarkable. And I'm spinning around, but anyone have any thoughts to riff off or questions that you wanted to ask any of the speakers that didn't get asked? Or anything in general you want to talk about? Or is everyone just really, really wanting to get something, some caffeine in their system right now? Yeah, Brandon.
I just want to say that this is all great, and for those that work in these different ways of displaying data, sharing data, or experiencing science, right? If you know of any research about how audiences use this and learn from it, if you can share that, I think that would greatly help us when we're thinking about white papers and when we're thinking about how to move this field forward as a group and sort of express it in a way that is meaningful to stakeholders as well. Is that helpful?
And I'm going to second Brandon's comments. We're in very early days for a lot of this technology and the usage of technology. So, you know, we're going to be doing the research as we do the development of that, right?
Yeah.
But I think this goes back to the discussion that we were having before. We haven't yet quite articulated what the use cases are for these technologies and how they're not just redundant with the 2D projections on a screen or with time on a video. And whether it be use case for virtualytics to enable data analysis and scientific discovery versus a use case for learning, improving learning outcomes, we need to get those use cases, start to develop them, get them down on paper, and actually try to understand what the added value is. I think we're all grappling with that, and there are a lot of naysayers out there who say this is just hype, you know, it's just something cool, it doesn't really add to our learning experience. So I want to just, again, second Brandon's comment and say that this is something we're going to have to work on. It's not going to happen within the next day, week, year. It's a long-term thing, but I think it requires focus from the community.
Okay, you have it.
We have started a project with a colleague in Sweden where we are investigating specifically the 3D aspect of what does it add to the learning. If you consider that, what are the cues for 3D perception? On Earth, around us, there are about 8 or 10 different kinds of cues that tell you that something is in front or behind something else, or closer or further away than something else. If you look at space images, nebulae and all that, there's only one of those that in some cases works. Or two, say, one is when you have dust. So you know that something is in front of or behind of dust, so it's occultation. And the other one is motion. You have motion parallax if you do that. But if you have a static image, you can't rely on that. So we are working on, we have designed an online questionnaire where we show people different kinds of images and movies, and where they're meant to say what they think is in front or in the back, or say classify the position along the line of sight of different types of images. So we are looking into that part, because when we show these nice animations and all that, you can't really know what people think or whether they grasp the spatial dimension of that, especially when it's a static image. And we're used to it and have a theory about all these objects in our mind, but they just see, maybe they just see colored blobs. So there is no research on that, basically.
I know some colleagues at NIH are actively studying various things beyond, especially. So I've spoken to a few of those, a few of them at ECVR meetups and different things. So I know the research is happening, maybe not here at NASA, but it's definitely happening. I spoke also to a Microsoft colleague again, AV. He went over to China, and apparently they are really far forward of us in the field of VR. It's much more expected. They've done a lot more research. So I think the research is out there to give us a good place to start from. At least on the scientific end, I don't know, and specifically.
Jonathan?
So specifically regarding two aspects of it. The first, 3D and how valuable 3D is for understanding data. I was involved in a project at Worldwide Telescope. The core of our visualization got turned into a product for Excel called PowerMap for Excel that allowed you to visualize 3D data and things like that. And there was still a lot of question as to the value of that versus simple 2D products and things like that, trying to see how you could understand. But one of the things that really accelerated it was, stereo and motion, right, really helped you understand the 3D environment and being able to move around it. So, for instance, the same visualizations that on a flat screen were not very effective. When you actually put them in a HoloLens and walk around them, are mind-blowingly different in terms of the impact about being able to understand. The other question that was asked is a lot here was, have any of these visualizations ever been useful for discovering something? And I think that a lot of the folks that are here in this room, at least in the presentations we're doing, there's a lot of polish and a lot of thought and forethought into taking concepts and visualizing these concepts to explain them to other people. But there's a lot of visualization tools that astronomers use that come up with a lot more crude plots and a lot more quick and dirty visualizations that don't have the polish for EPO, but actually make the discoveries and are used and very useful in those tools. And then oftentimes the EPO people come and say, oh, I can take that and make it pretty, right? So oftentimes by the time that our tools for making pretty things are there, the discovery's already been made. But good visualization tools about being rapidly able to visualize data quickly from astronomers' research data is something that is important for it, and it shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, that's very true, and we've certainly seen some good tools for that so far at the workshop. And one thought I just wanted to toss out, just cross-cutting a little bit over to a different topic, but just on synergies and why we're here. One thing about this session is I feel like we saw a lot of opportunity for collaboration coming out of this, because we have a lot of siloed approaches for things that we're focusing on, and just things like the question of Chandra asking, have you done this transparently so you can see layers? And I'm just watching this model of the universe go around, where the idea of just putting a light bulb in the center, even though the material isn't transparent, putting a light bulb in the center gives you a whole sense of depth and translucency, and that might actually cross-cut and be elements that might be helpful for, say, when Chandra's doing 3D printing, or when you want to do this. Or likewise, we have people who are specializing in VR work, in particle simulations, in sonification. I know, like in the TRAPPIST-1 VR, sound is like, and we toss that in at the end. That's nice music, a little bit of sound. But now system sounds and things like, I think there's a lot of opportunity if we know who our peers are to cut in and let's start putting these things together and build, full, the name of the session was virtual and multisensory realities. And I think we have so many possible collaborations to come out of this to start building, single experiences that touch and sight and sound, right? Sorry, this is just me blathering about how excited I am about everything you guys talked about today. Any other thoughts as we wrap up the session?